the first point I'll make, and this ties to a blog from a few months back, is that everyone in the room here is in the analytics space, and many of you, if not most all of you, are leaders in that space. And one thing that I think it's time for all of us to start pushing for is to actually get analytics elevated to be truly part of a business plan from the get-go. So every business plan you submit has a P&L. You'd be laughed out of the room if you didn't have a P&L. Unfortunately, what often happens today, there's a business plan, it might have a solid P&L, it might have a solid plan. After it's approved and after the implementation starts, people come to the analytics organization and go, hey, can you help us to find some analytics to track this thing? Obviously, that's a little bit late. We ought to be having the influence from the beginning to say, if this is what you're going to do, here's how we're going to measure it, here's how we'll collect the data, here's the analytics that we'll do. And it ought to be that an analytics plan is a piece of that business plan, just like the P&L is. So I'd encourage all of you to think about going back to your home bases and starting to push for that, to get involved a little bit earlier, because that enables a better impact and more accuracy. Another interesting point is around the hype of AI, and we're going to hear a number of talks about that touch on AI today. But I'll mention a point to keep in mind as you go back to your businesses, which is oftentimes, especially on the business side, there's executives who hear all this hype about AI, and this was very similar with big data a few years ago. They don't really understand it, but they're super excited to get involved. And so I had a client probably a month and a half ago who was talking to me, and they mentioned about how frustrated they were. They were in a meeting with an exec that it's hard for them to actually get time with typically, and all that exec wanted to talk about was, can AI help us with this? Can AI help us with that? And they mentioned how they spent most of the meeting actually trying to explain to that executive why AI wasn't really relevant for that. And I told them I actually thought that was a mistake they had made. And the reason is this: that executive was engaging them to talk about solving problems with analytics. And so you don't want to mislead them and say, this is exactly an AI problem if it's not. But you don't need to be the Debbie Downer throwing cold water on them either. Just say, hey, I hear your problem. I absolutely think we can solve that with analytics that might include AI. Can we get a project going for you and we'll do it? Later, when you deliver that project, if they say, hey, did that use AI? Maybe you go, well, we didn't actually have to use AI, but look at these results we got. They're terrific. Is there another project we can work on? So let them call it what they want. If you have an opportunity to have that discussion, especially with senior execs who often won't give you that time, look at it as a way to get that relationship going, and don't worry about correcting them or adjusting their semantics. Just leverage their excitement and get some things going. We'll hear a couple talks today that touch on skill sets, and this is a blog coming out tomorrow actually about the difference between a legacy skill set and a legacy mindset. And a lot of not necessarily the analytics teams, although it happens there, but when you get into a big company and there's an HR department and they're trying to come up with, who's going to have a future, who's not, are we going to do layoffs, et cetera, they focus on the assumption that if you have a legacy skill set, you also have a legacy mindset. And I think there's a very big difference. So what would I mean by legacy skill set? If you are an analytics person today, and for example, all you've ever done is program in SAS against a relational database, you've never touched the cloud, you've never touched R, you've never touched a data lake, you have sort of a legacy skill set, but those skills are completely transferable to using R against a data lake if you take the time to learn it. And a lot of times, people with that skill set are already learning this on their own. You might, it's not even about you necessarily have to have training programs. They're probably doing it on the side. Their job may require them to use those skills day to day, but a lot of them are able to upgrade. Now, the legacy mindset is what it sounds like. It's the people who do not want to change. They don't want to learn something new. They don't want to go out and change what they're doing. Now, that is a problem. But you have to separate the two and look at who do I have that has a legacy skill set, and if they don't have the mindset to go with it, they absolutely can be upskilled and uptrained. And part of the key to remember as well, some of those very people, if they're really, really good, might well leave your company if you don't give them the opportunity to upskill and start to do some other things as well because they want to expand. So don't make that mistake of churning people out just because they know some of the older tools and skill sets. A, those skill sets are still very relevant today and will be for quite some time, and B, if they have the right mindset, it won't matter. Another thing that actually really solidified in my head at our spring symposium, we had some venture capitalists or two speak at the main event, and we also had some side meetings that included them. And each of them made a variation on this same point, which is actually painful to say as an analytics person, right? But data in some ways today is more differentiating than analytics. And when VCs are investing, They're actually looking more for unique data than unique analytics. And here's why, and it's not as bad as it sounds, and it'll make sense. You know, if you go back 15 years, every company had substantially the same data. If you were a telco, you had your call detail records. If you're a retailer, you had your point of sale, et cetera. Most companies had finally got to the point where they had data, but it was the same data. At that same time, having access to analytics was actually still difficult. There weren't as many tools available. It required, you know, folks like here in the room. They were expensive. And so if you have the same data, how do you differentiate? You're the first people to actually get to some of these more complicated analytics. Fast forward to today. Every analytic algorithm is out there 1,000 different places. I mean, even Excel has built in what would have been considered deep algorithms even 10 to 15 years ago. And so the VC's point was, if you do much better analytics on a standard set of data, it's pretty easy, relatively speaking. I mean, when you're talking about investing tens of millions, maybe it takes you 6 months, a year of a couple people to replicate what someone else did, but the algorithms are there, the intelligence is there for someone to replicate that. But unique data can be far, far harder. So let's take the automobile space. There's companies out there that are doing nothing more than generating the data to help autonomous vehicles be trained. Because all you need, a video driving down the street, and these companies will tag, here's a pedestrian, here's a street marking, there's a stop sign, there's a squirrel. And while the car companies could go do this themselves, repetitively, every car company, that's really kind of a waste. It's very tactical. It's a waste of time. Why not just buy data ready to go? It's not unlike how you buy demographic data. No one goes out and does their own demographic surveys. They buy the overlays. So here's the key. In a few years then, when someone else wants to get in that business, they've got to go spend all the money to collect and tag all that data manually. Then they have to go to the automobile manufacturers and form a relationship, beat out an incumbent, and win a contract away from someone else. It's a lot higher bar to entry. So the holy grail here is obviously, to the extent you can get some data that others don't have, and then you can add analytics on top, that's going to be awesome. But you can't simply focus just on analytics in many cases, because a lot of people are focusing on those same analytics. And the last point, something that's coming up everywhere these days, and we have some research coming up on this as well, is about ethics and analytics. We'll be touching on that through some of the talks today. There's a lot more focus on ethics as we start to operationalize analytics in general, and particularly AI algorithms. What is the right thing to do? What is not? Simple questions like, if you're talking to a bot, does it have to tell you that it's a bot and not a person, even though it sounds the same? How do you look for bias in the data or in the model or in the use of the model? And there's not a lot of laws about this yet. There's not even a lot of, let's say, social norms about this yet. And you know, in the paper, we all read articles every week about something that is causing some controversy. So, you know, our view at IA is it's got to be the responsibility of the people like you in the room to own this at your organizations. You've got to be thinking about the ethical implications. You've got to be thinking about what is okay and not okay in your company's context, and consider forming things like committees. You know, in a university setting, research that involves animals or people, you have to go through a process with an ethics board to get it approved. And all that board does is basically sanity check, are you doing something that's not right here or not? So as analytics continues to grow, I believe these ethics are going to become a very, very big thing. So just some logistics for today. We've got a really good agenda. You have these little tags in your orange binders. There's the full agenda on the back. It's also on the website. We're going to take a couple of breaks and a lunch, obviously. We will be starting promptly based on the agenda, so please make sure that you do get back at the time that we're going to begin. There will be a happy hour immediately following as well, so feel free to stay and hang out for that. Anyone who's really worried that that storm appears, it's going to move. It'd be pretty much south of here. We might get some rain and so forth, but I don't anticipate we're going to have any issues unless something's changed in the last hour again. Keep in mind that when you registered for the conference, you saw a notice and acknowledged a notice about confidentiality and non-attribution. This is meant to be a safe environment where you can share. The general premise is just when you talk to somebody, keep in mind that they're having a conversation with an environment that we're meaning to be confidential. Don't go out and write a blog and say, person A from company B said this at the IAA Symposium. Those of you who are clients will put the videos of the sessions behind the firewall where you can log on and see it, but this will all be kept within the community. And the general rules of the road, just so you know, there is no press or media here. Everybody in this room is a client of IIA. You'll notice we don't do booth areas. There's not going to be salespeople hitting you up every time you turn around like at a lot of events. It's only practitioners. Everybody here is a client. Meet, mingle. That's a lot of the value of IIA is getting this opportunity. On the back here as well, there's a survey. There's the Wi-Fi information, and there's a link to, as well as the QR code where you can take the surveys. We really would love your feedback. Obviously, we guide the topics based on the feedback that we get each time. There's some links to a couple of the websites that are related to the day, and some of our social media handles and tags and so forth that you can use if you tweet generic information that isn't going to be sensitive. And last, if you do take the time to fill out your survey, we will be giving away a prize, and you'll have your choice of either an Apple TV or a Fire Cube. And what we'll do is we'll leave the surveys open for a week or two, and then we'll do a random drawing from those who had submitted it. And at that point, then what we'll do is call and contact the person, and we'll arrange to ship it to you. So I think that's what we needed to have you know for today. And so with that, let's go ahead and get into the event.